So, what really happens after the tanks roll in? How do you actually control a territory? It's a question that goes way beyond the battlefield. Today, we're going to dive deep into a report from the Institute for the Study of War that basically lays out the entire blueprint for how to make an occupation permanent.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the battle for the next generation. Then we'll get into the really troubling use of summer camps as a tool of control. After that, we're going to follow the money and see how assets and power are used to reward loyalty. And finally, we'll put all the pieces together to see the end goal, making the occupation absolutely irreversible.
Okay, so the very first part of this strategy is all about the hearts and minds of children. And let's be clear, this is not about temporary control. This is the long game. It's a plan to fundamentally reshape the identity of an entire generation, basically securing the occupation's future from the ground up.
It's a pretty chilling question to think about strategically. And the answer, at least according to this ISW report, starts with the youngest, most impressionable people in a society. The logic is simple and it's stark. If you can win over the kids, you can make the occupation last forever.
A key player in all of this is an organization called the Search Movement of Russia. Now, on the surface, it's a state-sponsored group. It's all about military history, patriotism, promoting patriotic education by honoring the Soviet military. But what it's actually doing in occupied Ukraine? Well, that goes a whole lot deeper. Just look at the range of activities they're involved in. It's a very deliberate mix. You've got things that sound kind of historical, like excavating old battlefields, right alongside explicitly political and military stuff. They're holding roundtable discussions about a greater Russia. At the same time, they're running military-style training for Ukrainian school kids. So you can see these activities really have two main goals. First, they try to legitimize the current invasion by creating these false historical parallels. And at the exact same time, they're working to militarize Ukrainian youth, conditioning them to see themselves as part of Russia's military tradition. And this quote from the Ukrainian Resistance Center really just hits the nail on the head. It shows you exactly how these actions are seen on the ground. They don't see this as some harmless patriotic education. They see it as a deliberate, systematic effort to erase one identity and just impose a new one, to create a new generation that's loyal to Russia. But this indoctrination effort doesn't just stop with local programs. The second piece of the strategy involves physically removing children from their homes, using so-called summer camps. The report frames these camps as tools for both deportation and indoctrination. Just let this number sink in for a second. 800 kilometers. That's about 500 miles. That's how far some Ukrainian children are being taken from their homes to a camp called Osry. This isn't just a trip to a local summer camp. This is a long-distance relocation, and it seems designed to sever a child's connection to their family, their community, and their culture. And this is not a small operation. We're talking about hundreds of kids. The ISW report also notes that you have high-ranking officials personally visiting these camps. This signals that this has high-level official backing. It's not some rogue program. So what's the official justification for all this? Well, the camp's own stated goal is to instill a civic position that's based on a love for Russian patriotic values. But, when you put that mission statement right next to the reality of transporting children 800 kilometers from home, the real indoctrination agenda becomes pretty undeniable. Okay, so controlling a population's future is one thing, but an occupation also has to control the present. And that brings us to the economic part of the playbook, seizing valuable assets not just for control, but to actively reward people who are loyal to the Kremlin. The port of Yalta is a perfect case study. Here's how it works. First, the asset is seized and put up for auction. Then, a company based in Moscow wins, as the only bidder. Then you find out that company is linked to an investment fund, which in turn has direct ties to Arkady Rotenberg, a major oligarch who is very close to the Kremlin. It's a straight pipeline from Ukrainian asset to a Kremlin loyalist.
And the Port of Yalta is not some random, isolated incident. The report makes it very clear that this is a consistent pattern. You create these legal and financial pipelines so that Russian oligarchs can personally profit from the occupation, which, of course, gives them a direct financial stake in its success. This table right here shows you just how widespread this is. You have Arkady Rotenberg with the Port of Yalta, but then you also have figures like Viktor Medvedchuk, who's been linked to exporting stolen Ukrainian grain, and Ramzan Kadyrov, who has reportedly been rewarded with assets from occupied Mariupol. Different people, different assets, but it's the same playbook every time. So, we've seen the strategy for social indoctrination and the mechanics of economic seizure. The final piece of the playbook is all about how these elements combine to achieve that one ultimate goal: making Russian control over these territories permanent and totally irreversible. Let's circle back to the Port of Yalta. The public justification is simple, right? We're just going to develop yacht tourism. It'll be great for the local economy. But the ISW's assessment reveals a much deeper, more strategic goal. This isn't really about tourism. It's about tangling the region's infrastructure so deeply into Russia's economy that any attempt by Ukraine to reintegrate it in the future becomes a logistical nightmare. So when you put it all together, the Russian occupation playbook, as detailed by the ISW, is this comprehensive multi-front strategy. You target the next generation's identity, you solidify loyalty by seizing and handing out economic assets, and you physically integrate the infrastructure to create facts on the ground that are incredibly hard to undo. Now, this explainer has been all about the mechanics of this occupation playbook. But the strategy that's been laid out here, it raises a much bigger question. When the goal isn't just to hold territory, but to erase and rebuild its entire future by targeting children, the economy, and the culture, how does that change the very meaning of victory and defeat?